This is a paper that uses mice to show that if COVID is transmitted from host to host to host unimpeded, then it will rapidly gain unique mutations that will create new emergent lineages. And this study was performed in immune-naïve mice, meaning that they hadn't encountered the virus prior. Through this work, they serially infected wild-type mice with COVID, and with each successive mouse that was infected, the COVID virus adapted to the mice themselves, and this yielded greater infectivity and greater mortality. So, right off the bat, they show that COVID does not get inherently milder over time, that in fact it can have greater infectivity, which is what we have seen, and that it can also lead to higher rates of mortality. So, with our unimpeded spread of COVID right now, that is not off the table. The two COVID variants they started with were Beta and Delta, and they sequentially infected mice 20 times. So they infected a mouse, it got sick, they took that infection, infected the next mouse, that mouse got sick, they took the infection, infected the next mouse, and so on and so on, where they found that the virus at the later stages of this process caused more severe disease at both the organism and lung tissue scales, with late passage Delta demonstrating antibody resistance and interferon suppression, where this antibody resistance co-occurred with the de novo spike S371F mutation. And it's interesting that that mutation is characteristic of Omicron. So it's very interesting that when they passed Delta 20 times in mice, it created an Omicron specific mutation, showing that there's preference for this evolution of the virus to create this type of spike mutation. Another finding that we've seen in literature prior is that they directly showed that late passage virus, so virus that had gone through this transmission process multiple times, produced more viral RNA, resulted in greater weight loss in the mice and worse lung inflammation. But only the late study Delta was associated with increased viral load and the inflammation changes, the cytokine changes linked to severe COVID, where they found for the Delta virus that by that 20th mouse, they yielded 4 to 5 times more infectious virus after 24 hours of infection than the initial Delta virus that they started with. But this difference in viral titers was no longer observable after 48 hours of infection. So, in this mouse bred COVID infection, it's building up to a high viral load very quickly. And by day 6 post infection, both the P20 mouse, the 20-day mouse of beta and delta viruses had greater impacts on the body, such as higher inflammatory markers and increased fluid in the lungs. And in terms of greater antibody resistance for the 20th passage mouse, these mice had significantly less antibody neutralization to the virus, even though they had been vaccinated, meaning that there's a higher degree of immune evasiveness, which is why it's very important that if you get COVID to not infect other people with it, because you're facilitating this whole process. And fascinatingly, while this was not an Omicron study, they developed an Omicron specific mutation in their study through this Delta variant 20 transmission passage. Again, demonstrating that unimpeded spread of a virus does not make the virus weaker, it just makes it better at evading your immune system.